When Lena Mercer's drunken stepfather dragged her into a smoke-filled saloon and sold her like cattle to settle a gambling debt, she thought her life was over. But the moment a scarred rancher named Coulter Hayes stepped forward, paid the debt himself, and took the contract away from the most dangerous man in the territory, everything changed. Now the whole town whispers that he simply bought himself a woman, but Lena knows the truth is far more complicated. This is a story about survival, trust, and two broken people learning to stand together when the entire frontier wants to tear them apart. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment with your city name so I can see how far this story travels. And don't forget to hit that like button. Let's go. The saloon stank of tobacco, sweat, and something rotting beneath the floorboards. Lena Mercer stood frozen near the back wall, her stepfather's fingers digging into her forearm like iron spikes. She didn't look at the men crowding the tables, didn't meet their eyes. She'd learned years ago that eye contact only made things worse. "Stay right there," Frank muttered, his breath sour with whiskey. "And keep your mouth shut." Lena nodded. She always nodded. It was easier that way. Frank lurched toward the poker table in the center of the room, where Barrett Kane sat like a king on a throne made of stolen land and broken promises. Barrett was a big man, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, with cold blue eyes that never blinked. He owned half the cattle in the valley and most of the men who worked them. People said he'd killed 3 men over water rights and walked away without a single charge. Lena had seen him around town before. Everyone had. You didn't forget a man like Barrett Kane. "Frank," Barrett said smoothly, not bothering to look up from his cards. "You're late." "I got it," Frank stammered, fumbling in his coat pocket. "I got what I owe you." Barrett finally glanced up. His eyes flicked toward Lena, lingered for a moment, then returned to Frank. "You don't look like a man who's got $500. Frank's face went pale. I need more time, just a week, maybe 2. "You've had 3 months. "Please, Barrett, I'll get it, I swear." Barrett set his cards down carefully, brushing dust from the table with one thick hand. The room had gone quiet. Even the piano player stopped mid-song. "You already owe me more than you'll ever make in your miserable life," Barrett said. "So unless you've got something worth trading, I suggest you start running before I lose my patience." Frank swallowed hard. Then he turned and looked directly at Lena. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. "Shut up," Frank hissed. Then louder to Barrett, "What about her?" Barrett's eyes slid back to Lena. This time, they stayed. "Her?" Barrett repeated. "My stepdaughter. She's 18, strong, can cook, clean, whatever you need." Lena's throat closed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The room blurred at the edges. Barrett stood slowly, pushing his chair back with a scrape that echoed through the silence. He walked toward her, boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Look at me," he said. Lena kept her eyes on the ground. "I said, look at me." She forced herself to lift her chin. Barrett studied her face like she was livestock at auction. She felt his gaze crawl over her hair, her cheekbones, her hands. She wanted to disappear into the wall. "She'll do," Barrett said finally. He turned back to Frank. "500 covers the debt, but she stays with me until I decide otherwise." "Deal," Frank said immediately. "No!" Lena's voice cracked. She grabbed Frank's sleeve, desperate. "You can't." Frank yanked his arm away. "You'll do what you're told, girl. I'm done carrying dead weight." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of these men." Barrett pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and a pen from the table. He scrawled something across the top, then shoved it toward Frank. "Sign." Frank didn't hesitate. His hand shook as he scribbled his name at the bottom. Lena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was really happening. She was being sold, traded, like a horse or a sack of grain. Barrett reached for the contract. "Hold on." The voice came from the shadows near the bar, low, calm, dangerous. Every head in the room turned. A man stepped into the lamplight. He was tall, lean, with dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. His face was weathered, lined with scars that looked old and deep. He wore a dusty coat and boots that had seen 1,000 miles of hard ground. His eyes were dark, unreadable. Lena had never seen him before. Barrett's jaw tightened. "Coulter." So he had a name. "This doesn't concern you," Barrett said. Coulter ignored him. He walked straight to the table, moving with the kind of quiet confidence that made men step aside without thinking. He picked up the contract, scanned it quickly, then set it back down. "How much does Frank owe you?" Coulter asked. "500, Barrett said, "and it's already settled." Coulter reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out bills onto the table, slow and deliberate. $500 exact. "There's your money," Coulter said. "The debt's paid." Frank's mouth fell open. Barrett's face went hard as stone. "The deal's done," Barrett said. "No, it's not." Coulter tapped the contract. "Frank signed this under duress. It's not legal." "You calling me a cheat?" "I'm calling you a man who preys on people who can't fight back." Coulter's voice didn't rise, but the air in the room shifted. Men at nearby tables leaned back, hands drifting toward their belts. Barrett stood perfectly still. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Barrett smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You want the girl that bad, Hayes? Fine. Take her." He shoved the contract toward Coulter. "But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've bought." Coulter didn't flinch. He folded the contract, tucked it into his coat, then turned to Lena. "Come on," he said quietly. Lena didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs felt like lead. Coulter waited, patient, not grabbing her, not ordering her, just waiting. Finally, she took one shaky step forward, then another. Frank didn't say a word, didn't even look at her. Lena followed Coulter out of the saloon, and the cool night air hit her like a slap. She gasped, sucking in breath, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. Coulter walked to a horse tied near the hitching post, a big roan mare with kind eyes. "Can you ride?" he asked. Lena nodded, though her hands were trembling. Coulter mounted first, then offered his hand. She hesitated, staring at his scarred knuckles, the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "I'm not him," Coulter said quietly. She didn't know if she believed that, but she took his hand anyway. He pulled her up behind him, and she barely had time to grab hold of his coat before he spurred the mare into motion. They rode through the empty streets of Dust Hollow, past the general store and the blacksmith shop, past the church with its crooked steeple. Lena looked back once and saw the saloon's yellow light spilling into the dirt street. Then they turned a corner, and it disappeared. The ranch sat at the base of Iron Mesa, a jagged wall of red rock that rose against the night sky like a fortress. The house was small, weathered, with a sagging porch and a chimney that leaned slightly to one side. A barn stood nearby, and beyond that, corrals and fencing stretched into the darkness. It looked lonely, forgotten. Coulter dismounted and helped Lena down. She stumbled, her legs stiff from the ride, and he steadied her with one hand on her elbow. "You can sleep in the house," he said. "I'll take the barn." Lena blinked. "What? You heard me?" "I don't understand." Coulter looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled the contract from his coat and held it out. "Take it," he said. She stared at the paper. "It's yours," Coulter said. "Burn it if you want. Keep it if you don't trust me. I don't care, but you're not my property, and I'm not Barrett Kane." Lena took the contract with shaking hands. The ink was still wet in places where Frank's signature bled into the fibers. "Why?" she whispered. Coulter turned away, leading the mare toward the barn. "Because nobody deserves to be sold like cattle." He disappeared into the shadows, and Lena stood alone in the yard, clutching the contract, wondering if she'd just traded one cage for another. She didn't sleep that night. The house was small but clean. A single room with a bed, a table, a wood stove, and shelves lined with jars of dried beans and preserves. The bed had a quilt that looked handmade, faded but soft. Lena sat on the edge of the mattress, the contract spread across her lap. She read it 3 times, looking for the trap. The clause that would bind her, the words that would make her his. But there was nothing, just Frank's scrawled signature and Barrett's cold handwriting. She folded it carefully and tucked it under the pillow. Outside, she could hear the wind rustling through the cottonwoods and the distant sound of an owl calling. No voices, no footsteps, no danger. It felt wrong, too quiet, too safe. She lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the door to open, waiting for Coulter to come back and demand something in return for what he'd done. But he never came. Morning broke gray and cold. Lena woke to the sound of a hammer striking metal, rhythmic and steady. She sat up, disoriented, and looked around the room. Everything was exactly as it had been. The contract was still under her pillow. She stood, smoothed her dress, and stepped outside. Coulter was at the corral, repairing a section of fence. He worked without a shirt, his back broad and scarred, sweat already darkening his skin despite the cool air. He didn't look up when she approached. "There's coffee on the stove," he said. Lena hesitated. "Do you want some?" "Already had mine." She watched him drive another nail into the post, his movements efficient and practiced. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. Coulter paused, glancing at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why did you bring me here? What do you expect?" He set the hammer down and wiped his hands on his pants. "I don't expect anything. That's not how this works." "It is now." Lena crossed her arms, frustration bubbling up. "So what, I just sit around and do nothing?" "You do whatever you want." "That's not an answer." Coulter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't bring you here to work for me or serve me or anything else. I brought you here because leaving you in that saloon with Barrett Kane would have been the same as putting a bullet in your head. If you want to stay, you can stay. If you want to leave, I'll give you money and a horse, and you can go wherever you want. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend like you owe me something, because you don't." Lena stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the angle, but all she saw was exhaustion. "Why?" she asked again. Coulter picked up the hammer, turning it over in his hands. "Because a long time ago someone should have done the same thing for someone I cared about. And they didn't." He didn't say anything else, just went back to hammering. Lena stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the house. The days blurred together. Lena stayed because she didn't know where else to go. She had no money, no family, no friends. Dust Hollow wasn't safe, and the frontier beyond was even worse. So she stayed. At first, she kept to herself. She cleaned the house because it gave her something to do, not because anyone asked. She cooked simple meals and left Coulter's portion on the table before retreating to the porch. He never complained, never commented, just ate in silence and went back to work. The ranch was struggling. Lena could see it in the cracked fences, the dry creek bed, the way Coulter worked from dawn to dusk without rest. The cattle were thin, the land was parched, and the whole place felt like it was held together by sheer stubbornness. One afternoon, Lena found him in the barn, repairing a saddle. She stood in the doorway watching him work. "Can I help?" she asked. Coulter glanced up, surprised. "You know how to fix tack?" "No, but I can learn." He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a pile of leather straps. "Start by sorting those, and anything torn goes in the left pile. Anything salvageable goes on the right." Lena sat down and got to work. They didn't talk much, but it felt different than the silence before. Less heavy. Tochiku. A week passed. Then 2. Lena learned how to mend fences, how to feed the horses, how to check the water troughs. Coulter didn't coddle her or treat her like she was fragile. He showed her once, then expected her to remember. She liked that. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind Iron Mesa, Lena finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Who was she? Coulter didn't look at her. Who? The person you said someone should have helped. His jaw tightened. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, My wife. Lena's chest squeezed. What happened? She got sick, fever. The town doctor wouldn't come out this far, and by the time I got her to Dust Hollow, it was too late. His voice was flat, but Lena could hear the weight beneath it. She died in a boarding house room while I was begging someone to help her. I'm sorry, Lena whispered. Coulter shook his head. It was 3 years ago. Doesn't matter now. But Lena could tell it did. They sat in silence, the sky turning from orange to purple to black. Thank you, Lena said quietly. For what? For not being him. Coulter looked at her, and for the first time something almost like a smile crossed his face. You already thanked me by not running. But peace didn't last. 2 weeks later, Lena was in the barn when she heard horses approaching. She stepped outside and saw 3 riders coming up the road. Coulter was already standing in the yard, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. The lead rider was a man with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. Behind him rode two others, both armed. "Coulter Hayes," the deputy called. "We need to talk." "About what?" Coulter's voice was calm, but Lena could feel the tension radiating off him. The deputy pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "Got a complaint from Barrett Kane. Says you took something that belongs to him." Lena's blood ran cold. "I didn't take anything," Coulter said. "I paid Frank Mercer's debt in full." "That's not what Barrett says." The deputy unfolded the paper. "He's got a signed contract saying the girl was part of the deal. Says you interfered with legal business." "That contract's worthless, and you know it." The deputy shrugged. "That's for a judge to decide. In the meantime, we're here to bring the girl back to town." "No," Coulter said. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun. "Don't make this difficult." Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I'm not going back." The deputy looked at her like she was a dog that had just spoken. "You don't get a say in this, girl." "Yes, she does," Coulter said. His voice was low, dangerous. "And if you try to take her, you're going to have a problem." The two men behind the deputy shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near their weapons. The deputy smiled, cold and thin. "You really want to die over this?" Coulter didn't move. "Do you?" The standoff stretched, seconds ticking by like hours. Then one of the men behind the deputy muttered something, and the deputy's smile faltered. "This isn't over," the deputy said finally. He wheeled his horse around. "Barrett's got friends in high places, Hayes. You're playing a game you can't win." The three men rode off, dust rising in their wake. Lena's legs nearly gave out. Coulter caught her by the arm, steadying her. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "I know." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You can still leave. I'll give you money, a horse. You can disappear before this gets worse." Lena thought about it. Really thought about it. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "I'm done running." Coulter studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Then we fight." That night, Lena couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping her awake. It was something else. Something harder to name. She stood on the porch, staring out at the dark shape of Iron Mesa against the stars. Behind her, the door creaked open. Coulter stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you'd be up," he said, handing her one. Lena took it, grateful for the warmth. They stood side by side, silent. "Why are you really doing this?" Lena asked. "It's not just about your wife." Coulter took a long sip of coffee. "No, it's not." "Then what?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes, something broken. "Because I'm tired of letting people like Barrett Kane take everything," he said. "And I'm tired of being too late to stop it." Lena felt something shift inside her. A wall she hadn't even known was there, crumbling. "We're going to lose," she said quietly. "Barrett has money, power, the law. Probably." "Then why fight?" Coulter smiled, bitter and sad. "Because losing on your feet is better than living on your knees." Lena looked down at her coffee, at the steam rising into the cold night air. Then she looked back at Coulter. "Okay," she said. "Okay what?" "Okay. Let's fight." Coulter held her gaze for a long moment. Then he raised his cup in a small, silent toast. They drank together, standing beneath the stars, while Iron Mesa loomed above them like a promise or a threat. And for the first time since that night in the saloon, Lena felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The first attack came 3 days later, just after dawn. Lena was in the chicken coop gathering eggs when she heard the crack of splitting wood. She dropped the basket and ran toward the barn, her heart already racing. Coulter was standing in front of the water trough, staring at the shattered remains of the main irrigation pipe. Water gushed from the break, flooding the dirt and turning it to mud. "Damn it!" he muttered, dropping to his knees to assess the damage. "What happened?" Lena asked, breathless. "Someone cut it. Clean break." He ran his hand along the pipe, his jaw tight. "This wasn't an accident." Lena looked around the yard, scanning the ridgeline beyond the corrals. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mesa, and for a moment she thought she saw movement near the rocks. "Are they still here?" she whispered. "Gone by now." Coulter stood, wiping his hands on his pants. They wanted us to know they could get close without us hearing. Lena's stomach twisted. Barrett has to be. They spent the rest of the morning repairing the pipe with scrap metal and wire. It was a temporary fix at best, and Coulter knew it. The whole irrigation system was old, barely holding together even before someone had sabotaged it. This is just the beginning, Coulter said quietly as they worked. He's testing us, seeing how much we can take before we break. Then we don't break, Lena said. Coulter glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he went back to work. By noon, the pipe was patched and the water was flowing again. But the damage was done. They'd lost half a day's irrigation, and in a drought, that mattered. That night, Coulter didn't go to the barn. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. Lena brought him coffee and sat beside him. You can't stay up every night, she said. Can't afford not to. Then I'll take a shift. Coulter looked at her. You know how to shoot? No. Then you're not taking a shift. Lena bristled. I can learn. Not fast enough. Try me. Coulter studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed and stood. Come on. He led her to the barn and pulled an old revolver from a cabinet near the tack room. It was heavy, worn, the grip smooth from years of use. This was my wife's, he said quietly, handing it to Lena. She never got the chance to use it. Lena held the gun carefully, feeling its weight. It felt dangerous, powerful. Coulter showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. They spent an hour in the yard, shooting at tin cans lined up on the fence. Lena missed more than she hit, but Coulter was patient. He didn't yell or criticize, just corrected her stance, adjusted her grip, and let her try again. By the time the sun set, she'd hit 3 cans out of 10. Not bad, Coulter said. Not good either. You'll get better. He took the revolver and reloaded it, then handed it back. Keep this with you, always. Lena tucked the gun into her belt, feeling its weight against her hip. It didn't make her feel safer, but it made her feel less helpless. And right now, that was enough. But the second attack came a week later. Lena woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart hammering, and ran to the window. The barn was on fire. Coulter, she screamed, grabbing the revolver and running outside. Coulter was already in the yard, shouting orders that didn't exist, trying to calm the panicked horses. Flames crawled up the side of the barn, licking at the dry wood, turning the night orange. Lena ran to the well and started hauling water, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the bucket. Coulter grabbed it from her and threw it onto the flames, but it barely made a dent. The horses, he yelled. Get them out! Lena ran into the barn, smoke stinging her eyes and throat. The horses were screaming, kicking at their stalls, eyes rolling white with terror. She fumbled with the first latch, her fingers clumsy with fear, and finally yanked the door open. The mare bolted past her, nearly knocking her down. She moved to the second stall, coughing, her lungs burning. The gelding inside reared, hooves flashing, and Lena ducked just in time. Easy, she gasped, reaching for the latch. Easy, boy. The horse didn't calm, but she got the door open and he thundered past her, disappearing into the night. Coulter appeared beside her, his face streaked with soot. That's all of them. Get out! They stumbled into the yard, gasping for air, and watched as the barn collapsed in on itself, sending up a shower of sparks that drifted into the black sky like dying stars. Lena sank to her knees, shaking. Coulter stood beside her, his hands clenched into fists, staring at the wreckage. They could have killed us, Lena whispered. They didn't want to kill us, Coulter said, his voice flat. They wanted to scare us. It worked. Coulter looked down at her, and she saw something cold and hard settle into his expression. Good. Let them think we're scared. The next morning, Coulter rode into Dust Hollow alone. Lena wanted to go with him, but he refused. Stay here. Keep the revolver close. If anyone comes near the ranch, shoot first and ask questions later. Where are you going? To have a conversation. He didn't say with who, but Lena knew. She spent the day pacing the yard, jumping at every sound, her hand never far from the gun at her hip. The horses had returned on their own, skittish but unharmed, and she spent an hour calming them and checking for injuries. The barn was a total loss. Charred beams and ash were all that remained. Lena stared at the wreckage and felt something ugly twist in her chest. Anger, real, burning anger. Coulter didn't return until sunset. He dismounted slowly, moving like every bone in his body ached.
"What happened?" Lena asked, rushing to meet him. Barrett wasn't there. Coulter handed her the reins.
But his men were. They made it real clear that if we don't leave, things are going to get worse. And the sheriff? Coulter's jaw tightened. The sheriff told me I should be grateful Barrett's being patient. Lena's hands curled into fists. So they're just going to let him destroy us. Looks that way. That's not fair. Coulter laughed, bitter and sharp. Fairness doesn't mean much out here. Lena wanted to argue, to scream, to do something. But she didn't know what. Coulter walked past her toward the house, his shoulders slumped. "Coulter," she called. He stopped but didn't turn around. "We're not leaving," she said. He looked back at her, exhaustion written across his face. "I know." They rebuilt what they could. The barn was gone, but they constructed a lean-to shelter for the horses using salvaged wood and canvas tarps. It wasn't much, but it kept the animals out of the rain when the storms rolled in. And the storms did roll in. Hard, violent, turning the dirt roads to rivers of mud and the sky into a bruised, angry thing. Lena worked alongside Coulter every day, learning as she went. She learned how to shoe a horse, how to mend a saddle, how to read the sky for weather. Her hands blistered and bled, and she stopped caring. The contract stayed under her pillow, untouched. She didn't need to read it anymore. She knew what it said, and she knew it didn't matter. What mattered was this: the ranch, the work, the quiet understanding that had grown between her and Coulter. One night, as they sat on the porch sharing a bottle of whiskey Coulter had pulled from the back of a cabinet, Lena finally asked the question she'd been holding on to. "Why didn't you just give me to Barrett?" Coulter took a long drink, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You really want to know?" "Yeah." He stared out at the mesa, the moonlight turning the red rock silver. "Because I spent 3 years wishing I'd done things different. Wishing I'd fought harder for what mattered instead of letting people like Barrett take it from me. And when I saw you standing in that saloon, I realized I had a choice. I could walk away like I did before, or I could do something about it. You could have just paid Frank's debt and left me in town. I could have." Coulter looked at her. "But I didn't want to." Lena felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But something close. Something that felt like trust. "I'm glad you didn't," she said quietly. Coulter nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence, passing the bottle back and forth, until the moon set and the stars began to fade. Barrett's men came back 2 weeks later. This time, there were 5 of them. They rode up to the ranch in broad daylight, armed and arrogant. Lena and Coulter were mending fence when they saw the dust cloud rising in the distance. "Get to the house," Coulter said. "No." "Lena, I said no." She pulled the revolver from her belt and checked the chamber. Fully loaded. Coulter looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just pulled his own rifle from the saddle holster and walked toward the riders. Lena followed, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The riders stopped at the edge of the property. The man in front was tall and broad, with a scar running down the side of his face. He smiled when he saw Coulter. "Hayes," he said. "Barrett sent us to deliver a message." "I'm listening," Coulter said. "He's offering you one last chance. Sign over the water rights to Iron Mesa, take your woman, and leave. He'll even pay you for the land. $500. Coulter didn't move. "Tell Barrett he can take his offer and shove it up his ass." The man's smile widened. "That's what we figured you'd say." He nodded to the others, and they spread out, surrounding Coulter and Lena. Lena raised the revolver, aiming at the nearest rider. "Don't!" The man looked at her and laughed. "You even know how to use that, girl." Lena pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt near the man's horse. The animal spooked, rearing, and the rider cursed, struggling to keep control. The laughter stopped. Coulter raised his rifle, calm and steady. "Next one doesn't miss." The scarred man held up a hand, stopping his men from drawing their weapons. "Easy now. No need for bloodshed." "Then leave," Coulter said. The man studied them for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat. "Suit yourself. But don't say we didn't warn you." They turned their horses and rode off, slow and deliberate, making it clear they weren't afraid. Lena lowered the revolver, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Coulter looked at her.
You okay? Yeah. She swallowed hard. Yeah, I'm okay. You did good. Lena let out a shaky laugh. I missed.
Doesn't matter. You stood your ground. Coulter shouldered his rifle. That's what counts. Molten. But standing their ground wasn't enough. Barrett's attacks grew bolder. Fences were cut in the night. Cattle disappeared. Water troughs were poisoned. And then the drought hit. The creek that fed Iron Mesa dried up completely, leaving nothing but cracked mud and dying grass. The cattle grew thin and desperate, and Coulter spent every waking hour trying to keep them alive. Lena helped however she could, hauling water from the well until her back screamed and her hands bled. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. One afternoon, she found Coulter sitting on the porch, his head in his hands. We're going to lose everything, he said quietly. Lena sat beside him, exhausted and filthy. Not if we fight. We are fighting, and we're losing. Then we fight harder. Coulter looked at her, his eyes hollow. There's nothing left to fight with.
Lena grabbed his hand, forcing him to meet her gaze. Yes, there is. We have each other. Coulter stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might pull away, but then his fingers tightened around hers. Okay, he said. Okay.
That night, Lena came up with a plan. We need help, she said. We can't do this alone.
Who's going to help us? Coulter asked. Everyone in Dust Hollow is either afraid of Barrett or on his payroll. Then we go somewhere else. Where? Lena thought for a moment. There's a settlement north of here, Cooper's Ridge. I heard people there don't bow to Barrett. Coulter frowned. That's 2 days' ride through open country. If Barrett's men catch us, they won't. You don't know that. No, but I know staying here and waiting to die is worse. Coulter was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. We leave at first light.
They rode out before dawn, taking only what they could carry. Lena felt a pang of guilt leaving the ranch unprotected, but Coulter assured her there was nothing left worth stealing. The ride was brutal. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the land stretched flat and barren in every direction. They passed abandoned homesteads, dry riverbeds, and the bleached bones of cattle that hadn't survived the drought. On the second day, they saw riders in the distance. Barrett's men, Coulter muttered, spurring his horse faster. Lena glanced back and saw the riders gaining on them. 3 men, moving fast. We're not going to outrun them, she said. I know. Coulter scanned the horizon, then pointed toward a cluster of rocks. There. We can hold them off. They reached the rocks just as the riders closed in. Coulter dismounted and pulled his rifle, positioning himself behind cover. Lena did the same, her hands steady now, her fear replaced by cold determination. The riders stopped just out of range, their horses stamping and snorting. That's far enough, Coulter shouted. The lead rider, a thin man with a patchy beard, laughed. You two are making this real hard on yourselves. We're not going back, Lena called. Didn't figure you would. The man drew his pistol. Barrett said to bring you back alive if possible, but he didn't say in how many pieces. The shooting started fast and brutal. Lena fired twice, missing both times, but forcing the riders to take cover. Coulter's first shot took down one of the horses, sending its rider tumbling into the dirt. The other 2 men returned fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks, sending up sprays of dust and stone. Lena reloaded, her fingers fumbling with the bullets. She could hear Coulter breathing hard beside her, could smell gunpowder and sweat. One of the riders made a break for it, charging toward their position. Coulter fired, and the man went down hard, clutching his leg. The last rider hesitated, looking at his fallen companions. Then he turned his horse and fled. Coulter lowered his rifle, his hands shaking. Lena sank against the rocks, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. You hit? Coulter asked. No, you? No. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wounded man groan in the distance. We need to keep moving, Coulter said finally. Lena nodded, too numb to speak. They mounted up and rode north, leaving the bodies behind. Cooper's Ridge was smaller than Lena expected. Just a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street, but the people there looked Coulter in the eye when he spoke, and nobody mentioned Barrett Kane. They found help in a rancher named Thomas Kern, a grizzled old man with a limp and a sharp mind. He listened to Coulter's story without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and stroked his beard. Barrett's been pushing into this territory for years, Thomas said. Most folks here would love to see him taken down a peg. Then help us, Lena said. Thomas looked at her, his eyes shrewd. What's in it for us? Water, Coulter said. Iron Mesa's got the best water source in the valley. If we can hold it, we'll share it. Fair terms, no strings. Thomas considered this, then he nodded. All right, I'll talk to the others, see who's willing to stand with you. By the end of the week, they had 5 families committed. It wasn't an army, but it was something. Coulter shook Thomas's hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Thomas said. Barrett's not going to take this lying down. I know. Thomas grinned, showing missing teeth. Good. Then let's give him hell. They rode back to Iron Mesa with 12 men and enough supplies to last a month. The ranch looked smaller than Lena remembered, more vulnerable. But it was theirs, and they were going to fight for it. Coulter gathered everyone in the yard and laid out the plan. They would fortify the ranch, set up watches, and prepare for Barrett's inevitable retaliation. Lena worked alongside the men, digging trenches, reinforcing fences, stockpiling ammunition. Nobody questioned her presence. Nobody told her to stay inside where it was safe. She was part of this now, and she wasn't backing down. That night, as she and Coulter sat on the porch watching the stars, he said quietly, "You didn't have to come back." "Yes, I did." "Why?" Lena looked at him, at the tired lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, the quiet strength that had kept him standing when everything else fell apart. "Because this is home," she said simply. Coulter held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Barrett's answer came 5 days later, carried by smoke and thunder. Lena was hauling water from the well when she heard the first gunshot crack across the valley. She dropped the bucket and ran toward the house, her hand already reaching for the revolver at her hip. Coulter was on the roof with Thomas Kern, both men crouched low behind the chimney. 3 of the Cooper's Ridge men were positioned near the corrals, rifles aimed at the ridge line. "How many?" Lena shouted up. "At least a dozen," Coulter called back. "Maybe more. They're using the rocks for cover." Another shot rang out, splintering wood near the porch. Lena ducked inside and grabbed the Winchester rifle they'd stashed by the door. Her hands were steadier than they'd been during the first attack, muscle memory taking over where fear used to live. She took position at the window, scanning the mesa for movement. A figure darted between 2 boulders, and she fired. The shot went wide, but it forced the man back into hiding. "Save your ammunition," Coulter yelled. "Don't waste shots." The gunfight lasted 3 hours. It wasn't the dramatic shootout Lena had imagined when she thought about frontier violence. It was slow, grinding, punctuated by long silences broken by sudden bursts of gunfire that made her flinch every time. One of the Cooper's Ridge men took a bullet through the shoulder and had to be dragged inside. Lena tore strips from an old sheet and helped bind the wound while the man bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. "You're doing fine," she told him, though her hands were shaking and the blood soaking through the fabric said otherwise. By the time the sun started setting, Barrett's men pulled back. Lena watched them retreat into the twilight, counting shadows. 11 riders. They'd come with 12. Coulter climbed down from the roof, his face streaked with powder residue and exhaustion. "Anyone else hit?" "Just Morrison," Thomas said, gesturing to the wounded man. "He'll live, but he's out of the fight." "Good. That's good." Coulter rubbed his eyes. "They'll be back tomorrow, or the day after. This was just to test our defenses." "Worked pretty well," one of the Cooper's Ridge men muttered. "We held them off." "We got lucky," Coulter said flatly. "Next time they'll come harder." Lena followed him outside. The yard was littered with spent shell casings that glinted in the dying light like scattered coins. "How long can we keep this up?" she asked quietly. "As long as we have to." "That's not an answer." Coulter turned to look at her, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke it. "I don't know." That night, nobody slept. They kept watch in shifts, 2 men always awake while the others rested with their boots on and rifles within reach. Lena took a shift with Thomas, the old rancher, teaching her how to read the darkness for movement, how to listen for sounds that didn't belong. "You're tougher than you look," Thomas said, chewing on a piece of jerky. "I don't feel tough."
Nobody who's actually tough ever does. He spat into the dirt. The ones who talk big are usually the first to run when things get bad. You stayed. That counts for something. Lena thought about Frank, about the saloon, about every moment in her life when running had seemed like the only option. Tired of running. Good. Because what's coming next is going to make tonight look like a Sunday picnic. He wasn't wrong.
Barrett's second attack came at dawn, coordinated and vicious. They hit from 3 sides simultaneously, pinning the defenders in a crossfire that turned the ranch into a killing ground. Lena fired from the window until the barrel of her rifle grew hot enough to burn her hands. She reloaded mechanically, her ears ringing from the constant gunfire, her eyes stinging from smoke. One of the corrals caught fire, flames racing along the dry wood. Coulter and 2 others ran out to free the horses, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. Lena provided covering fire, shooting at muzzle flashes in the rocks, not knowing if she hit anything or anyone. A bullet punched through the wall 6 inches from her head, showering her with splinters. She dropped, gasping, heart hammering, then forced herself back up to the window. This time she saw the shooter, a young man, maybe 20, crouched behind a water trough. She aimed carefully, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The man went down. Lena's stomach lurched. She'd killed people before during the ambush on the road to Cooper's Ridge, but this was different. This was deliberate. She could see his face. "Lena!" Coulter's voice cut through her shock. "Reload! They're pushing forward!" She shoved the nausea down and grabbed more cartridges, her hands moving on autopilot. The attack lasted until mid-morning, when Barrett's men finally pulled back again. This time they left 3 bodies behind and took 2 wounded with them. The defenders had lost 1 man, a farmer from Cooper's Ridge named Webb, who'd taken a bullet through the throat and died before anyone could reach him. They buried him that afternoon in the hard ground behind the house. Nobody knew any prayers, so they stood in silence while Thomas said a few words about bravery and sacrifice that sounded hollow against the hot wind. Lena helped shovel dirt over the grave, each scoop feeling heavier than the last. When it was done, she walked to the edge of the property and vomited until there was nothing left. Coulter found her there, sitting in the dust with her head between her knees. "First time's always the worst," he said quietly. "I killed him." "You defended yourself. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lena looked up at him, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "He's still dead." Coulter sat down beside her. "Yeah, he is. And tomorrow there'll probably be more. That's what war looks like." "This isn't war, this is just one man's greed." Barrett doesn't see it that way. To him, this is business, and we're standing between him and profit. Coulter picked up a handful of dirt and let it sift through his fingers. "The question isn't whether what we're doing is right. The question is whether we can live with the cost." Lena wiped her eyes, leaving muddy streaks across her cheeks. "Can you?" "I have to. Because if we stop now, Webb died for nothing, and every person who's standing with us gets handed over to Barrett like cattle at market." He looked at her. "But you don't have to stay. I meant what I said before. You can still leave." Lena thought about it, really thought about it this time. Thought about running, about disappearing into some other town where nobody knew her name and Barrett Kane was just a rumor. Then she thought about the ranch, about the people inside who'd risked everything to stand with them, about Coulter, who'd given her something she'd never had before, the choice to fight back. "No," she said. "I'm staying." Coulter nodded slowly. "All right then." They sat together in the dust while the sun climbed higher and the day grew brutal and unforgiving. The attacks continued. Not every day, but often enough that nobody could relax. Barrett was bleeding them slowly, wearing them down, waiting for them to make a mistake. Supplies ran low, ammunition, food, medical supplies. The well was still producing water, but barely, and every drop felt precious. Thomas organized rationing, dividing what they had into careful portions. Nobody complained, but Lena could see the strain in their faces, the way their eyes had gone hollow and watchful. One night, she found Coulter in the ruins of the barn, staring at the charred beams. "We can't keep this up forever," she said. "I know." "Then what's the plan?" Coulter was quiet for a long time. "We need to take the fight to him." Lena blinked. "What?" Barrett's sitting comfortable in Dust Hollow while we're out here dying by inches. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants or until we make it too costly for him to continue. How do we do that? We go after his money. Coulter turned to face her. Barrett's got contracts, ledgers, payment records for every dirty deal he's made. If we can get our hands on those documents and bring them to a real judge, not the sheriff, someone from the territorial court, we can prove he's been operating outside the law. That's insane. How would we even get inside his office? Carefully. Coulter's expression was grim. And probably not all of us walk out. Lena's stomach dropped. You can't be serious. I'm dead serious. This ranch is already lost. We're just too stubborn to admit it. But if we can take Barrett down with us, maybe the next person who stands up to him has a chance. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it. Coulter looked back at the burned barn. I'm not asking anyone else to come with me. This is my fight. It always has been. You're wrong. Lena stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. This stopped being just your fight the moment you paid my debt. We're in this together. All of us. Coulter searched her face. You're sure? Yes. He exhaled slowly. Then we need to plan this carefully, because we're only going to get one shot. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Thomas helped them map out the route into Dust Hollow, identifying which buildings Barrett owned and where his office was located. 2 of the Cooper's Ridge men volunteered to create a distraction on the north side of town, while Coulter and Lena went in from the south. This is a suicide run, Thomas said bluntly during one of the planning sessions. You know that, right? I know, Coulter said. And you're still going? Yes. Thomas shook his head. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest. Probably both. They left at midnight, riding hard under a moonless sky. Lena's heart hammered the entire way, her mind cycling through everything that could go wrong. Barrett's men could spot them. The distraction could fail. They could get trapped inside the building with no way out. But she didn't voice any of it. Coulter needed her steady, not spiraling. They reached Dust Hollow just before dawn and tied their horses in a copse of trees outside town. The settlement was quiet, most people still asleep. Coulter checked his revolver one last time, then looked at Lena. Stay close. If shooting starts, run. I'm not running. Lena, I'm not running. He held her gaze, then nodded. All right, let's go. They moved through the shadows between buildings, keeping low, moving fast. Barrett's office was above the saloon, accessed by an exterior staircase that creaked under their weight. The door was locked. Coulter pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked at the mechanism until something clicked. They slipped inside. The office was exactly what Lena expected. Expensive furniture, maps on the walls showing Barrett's land holdings, a heavy desk covered in papers. Coulter went straight for the desk while Lena kept watch at the window. Anything? She whispered. Ledgers, contracts. Coulter was rifling through drawers, pulling out documents and stacking them on the desk. Here, payment records to the sheriff, and this one shows him buying stolen cattle from rustlers. That's enough to hang him. If we can get it to a judge, Coulter shoved the papers into a leather satchel. Come on, we need to... The door burst open. Barrett Kane stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed men. He smiled when he saw them. Hayes, Barrett said pleasantly, I was wondering when you'd show up. Coulter's hand moved toward his gun, but Barrett's men already had their weapons drawn. I wouldn't, Barrett said, unless you want the girl's brains on my nice carpet. Coulter froze. Barrett stepped into the room, his boots loud on the wooden floor. You really thought I wouldn't have someone watching this place? You're getting sloppy in your old age. Let her go, Coulter said. This is between you and me. Oh, I don't think so. Barrett's eyes slid to Lena. She's been quite the nuisance, making you braver than you have any right to be. Touch her and I'll kill you, Coulter said quietly. Barrett laughed. With what? You're surrounded, outgunned, and in about 5 minutes my men are going to ride out to Iron Mesa and burn what's left of it to the ground, along with everyone inside. Lena's blood ran cold. No. Oh yes, I tried being patient, tried giving you chances to walk away, but you just wouldn't listen. Barrett gestured to his men. Take them to the cellar. I'll decide what to do with them later. The men moved forward. That's when the explosion hit. The north side of town erupted in flames and noise exactly as planned. Barrett's men spun toward the window, distracted for just a second. It was enough. Coulter drew his revolver and fired twice. One of Barrett's men went down. Lena grabbed the oil lamp from the desk and hurled it at another, glass shattering, flames spreading across his coat. The room descended into chaos. Barrett dove behind the desk. Lena grabbed the satchel of documents and ran for the door. Coulter was right behind her, firing over his shoulder. They hit the stairs at a dead run, bullets chewing up the wood around them. Lena stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. Behind them, she could hear Barrett screaming orders. They reached the horses and mounted up, Lena clutching the satchel to her chest. Coulter spurred his mare into a gallop, and they tore out of town with half of Barrett's men chasing them. The ride back to Iron Mesa was a nightmare. Gunfire, dust, the thunder of hooves. Lena didn't know how many times bullets passed close enough to hear, only that each one felt like borrowed time. They lost the pursuit somewhere in the canyons, Barrett's men either giving up or losing the trail in the dark. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was rising, painting Iron Mesa in shades of blood and gold. Thomas met them in the yard, his face pale. "We heard explosions. Thought you were dead." "Not yet," Coulter said, dismounting. He handed Thomas the satchel. "Get this to the territorial judge in Clearwater. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. Just go." Thomas looked inside the satchel, his eyes widening. "Is this everything we need to bury Barrett Kane, but only if it reaches the judge before Barrett's men catch up?" Thomas nodded grimly. "I'll leave now. Take Morrison with you. He's no good in a fight with that shoulder anyway." Within an hour, Thomas and Morrison were gone, riding north with the documents that could end this war. Lena sat on the porch steps, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Coulter sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You think they'll make it?" she asked. "Thomas is smart. He'll find a way." "And if he doesn't?" Coulter didn't answer. He didn't have to. They sat in silence while the ranch came alive around them, people moving with purpose, preparing for whatever came next. "I'm sorry," Coulter said finally. Lena looked at him. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. You could have been long gone by now. Safe." "I could have been a lot of things," Lena said. "But I'm here, and I chose that." Coulter turned to look at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Why?" Lena thought about all the reasons. Because she was tired of being afraid. Because she'd finally found something worth fighting for. Because somewhere along the way, this broken-down ranch had become more of a home than anywhere she'd ever lived. But what she said was simpler. "Because you gave me a choice. And that's more than anyone else ever did." Coulter held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. They sat like that, fingers intertwined, watching the sun climb higher while the shadows shortened and the day grew hot and unforgiving. 2 days later, Barrett's army arrived. Lena counted 23 riders from her position on the roof. They spread out along the ridgeline, surrounding the ranch, cutting off every escape route. Barrett rode at the front, sitting tall in his saddle, confident and cruel. "Hayes," he shouted, "you cost me a lot of money with that stunt in town, and now I'm going to cost you everything." Coulter stepped into the yard, rifle in hand. "You want this ranch so bad? Come take it." Barrett smiled. "I intend to." He raised his hand and the attack began. It was worse than before. Organized, brutal. Barrett's men came from every direction, using fire and explosives to break through the defenses. Lena fought like she'd been doing it her whole life. Loading, firing, reloading. Her world narrowed to the rifle in her hands, the targets in her sights, the acrid smell of gunpowder. One of the Cooper's Ridge men fell. Then another. The house caught fire. Flames raced up the walls, consuming the place Lena had started to think of as home. "Fall back to the well," Coulter shouted. They retreated, dragging the wounded with them, taking cover behind the stone well house while Barrett's men closed in. Lena's ammunition ran out. She threw the rifle aside and drew the revolver, the one that had belonged to Coulter's wife. 5 shots left. She made each one count. The fighting reached a fever pitch, both sides locked in brutal close-quarters combat. Lena saw Coulter take a bullet to the leg and go down. She screamed his name, started toward him. That's when the new gunfire started, but it wasn't coming from Barrett's men. Lena turned and saw riders pouring into the valley from the north. 20 of them. 30. More. Leading them was a man in a dark coat with a silver badge on his chest. the territorial judge. Thomas had made it. Barrett's men, caught between two forces, broke and ran. Some tried to fight, but they were outnumbered now, outgunned. Barrett himself wheeled his horse around, trying to escape, but Coulter staggered to his feet and fired. The shot took Barrett in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. The judge's men rounded up the survivors, disarming them, binding their hands. Lena dropped to her knees beside Coulter, pressing her hands against the wound in his leg. "You're okay. You're okay." "Yeah," Coulter gasped. "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. The bullet had gone clean through, but he was losing blood fast. The judge dismounted and walked over, his face grim. "Coulter Hayes?" "That's me." "Thomas Kern brought me some very interesting documents, along with testimony from several people Barrett tried to silence." The judge looked at Barrett, who was being hauled to his feet by two deputies. "I think we have enough to put this man away for a very long time." Barrett spat blood. "You think this is over? I have friends, lawyers. You can't—" "Take him away," the judge said flatly. As Barrett was dragged toward a wagon, he locked eyes with Lena. For a moment, she saw something that might have been fear. Then he was gone. The judge turned back to Coulter. "We need to get you to a doctor. The ranch—" "We'll still be here when you get back." The judge's expression softened slightly. "You did a brave thing standing up to him. A lot of people are going to benefit from that." Coulter looked at Lena, his face pale from blood loss. "We did it." "Yeah," Lena said, her voice breaking. "We did." As they loaded Coulter into a wagon, Lena looked back at Iron Mesa. The house was a smoking ruin. The barn was gone. The corrals were shattered, but the land was theirs, and Barrett Kane was finished. The doctor in Clearwater was a tired-looking woman named Dr. Martha Finch, who'd seen more gunshot wounds than she cared to count. She worked on Coulter's leg for 3 hours while Lena sat in the waiting room, listening to the muffled sounds of instruments clinking and Coulter's occasional grunt of pain. When Dr. Finch finally emerged, her apron was stained dark with blood. "He'll live," she said without preamble. "Bullet went clean through, missed the bone. He's lucky." Lena sagged with relief. "Can I see him?" "Give him a few minutes. He's still coming around from the laudanum." Dr. Finch wiped her hands on a cloth. "You the one who kept pressure on the wound?" "Yes." "Good work. Any longer and he would have bled out before reaching me." She studied Lena with sharp eyes. "You learned that in the fighting." "Learned it keeping people alive," Lena said quietly. Dr. Finch nodded. "You'll want to change those dressings twice a day. Keep the wound clean. If it starts smelling bad or he gets a fever, bring him back immediately." "I will. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just pay my bill." Lena found Coulter propped up on a narrow bed in the back room, his leg wrapped in fresh bandages. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. "Hey," he said when he saw her. "Hey yourself." Lena pulled a chair close and sat down. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." "That's because you did." Coulter managed a weak smile. "Doc says I'll be walking again in a few weeks. Won't be pretty, but I'll manage." "You always manage." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside the window, Lena could hear the sounds of Clearwater going about its business. Wagons rattling past, voices calling to each other. Normal life, continuing like the world hadn't just been turned upside down. "What happened after they took me?" Coulter asked. "The judge's men rounded up everyone. Barrett's in custody, so are most of his people." Lena picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Thomas says the trial will probably happen here in Clearwater. The judge doesn't trust Dust Hollow's court." "Smart man." "He wants us to testify." Coulter's jaw tightened. "When?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Depends on how fast they can get everything organized." "You gonna do it?" Lena looked at him surprised. "Of course. Aren't you?" "I'll do whatever needs doing. But you don't have to. You could disappear before then. Start over somewhere nobody knows your name." "I'm not running," Lena said firmly. "I told you that already. This is different. Barrett's got lawyers, money. Even locked up, he's dangerous. If you testify, you become a target. I've been a target since the day he tried to buy me in that saloon. Standing up in court isn't going to change that." She reached out and took his hand. "We finished this together, just like we started it." Coulter searched her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. together. They stayed in Clearwater for a week while Coulter healed enough to travel. The judge arranged for them to stay in a boarding house, a clean but sparse room with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the main street. Lena spent her days helping Dr. Finch with other patients, earning enough money to pay their board and Coulter's medical bills. The work was hard but honest, and it felt good to use her hands for healing instead of fighting. Coulter spent most of his time in bed, frustrated and restless. He wasn't good at sitting still, and the forced inactivity made him surly. "I should be back at the ranch," he muttered one afternoon, staring at the ceiling. "The ranch isn't going anywhere," Lena said, not looking up from the shirt she was mending. "Neither am I, apparently." "You're healing. That takes time." "I don't have time. The cattle need tending. The fences need fixing. The whole place is probably falling apart without me." Lena set down her needle. "Thomas has people watching it. He sent word yesterday. Everything's fine." "Fine isn't good enough. Coulter." She waited until he looked at her. "You got shot. You nearly died. The ranch can wait a few more weeks." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Letting other people take care of things. Trusting that it'll be okay without me." Lena understood that better than he knew. She'd spent 18 years learning that trusting people usually ended in disappointment or pain. But things were different now. She was different. "Maybe it's time to learn," she said gently. Coulter was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "Yeah, maybe it is." The trial date was set for 3 weeks out. The judge sent word that he'd subpoenaed dozens of witnesses, including the sheriff from Dust Hollow, several of Barrett's former employees, and people who'd suffered under Barrett's various schemes over the years. "This is bigger than just us," Thomas explained when he visited them at the boarding house. "Barrett's been running roughshod over this territory for a decade. A lot of folks are going to be real interested in seeing him brought down." "Will it stick?" Coulter asked. "The charges, I mean, or is he going to buy his way out?" Thomas's expression was grim. "That's the question, isn't it? He's got money and connections. But the judge seems like an honest man, and the evidence we got from his office is pretty damning." "Seems like isn't the same as is," Lena said. "No," Thomas agreed. "It's not, but it's the best shot we've got." After Thomas left, Lena stood at the window watching the street below. A woman walked past carrying a basket of laundry. 2 children chased each other around a water trough. A man in a dusty coat tied his horse to a hitching post. Normal people, living normal lives, not fighting for survival every single day. "You thinking about running?" Coulter asked from the bed. Lena turned to look at him. "No, why would you think that?" "You've got that look, like you're measuring distances." She came back to the chair beside his bed. "I was thinking about what comes after. If Barrett goes to prison, if we actually win this thing." "What about it?" "What do we do then? The ranch is half destroyed. We don't have money to rebuild. The cattle are scattered or dead." She met his eyes. "What's left to go back to?" Coulter was quiet for a long moment. "The land, the water. That's what this whole fight was about, remember? Barrett wanted Iron Mesa because it's got the best water source in the valley. That hasn't changed. Water doesn't rebuild a barn or a house. No, but it's valuable, and people need it." He shifted on the bed, wincing slightly. "We start small. Share the water with the neighbors. Build up slowly. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." "Is that what you want? To rebuild?" "I don't know what I want anymore," Coulter admitted. "A month ago, I would have said I wanted to be left alone. Work the land, keep my head down. But that's not an option now." "Because of Barrett?" "Because of you." Lena blinked. "What?" Coulter looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her chest tighten. "You changed things. Made me remember that some fights are worth having, that running away isn't the same as surviving." He paused. "I'm not saying I've got it all figured out, but whatever comes next, I want you to be part of it, if you'll stay." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lena had spent her whole life being told what she was worth, what she owed, what she should do. Frank had controlled her through fear and neglect. Barrett had tried to own her outright. Even Coulter, in the beginning, had made decisions for her, albeit with good intentions. But this was different. This was a choice, a real one. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "But not as someone you rescued. Not as someone who owes you."
I never wanted that. I know. But I need to say it anyway. She leaned forward. If we do this, if we rebuild Iron Mesa together, it has to be as equals, partners, not owner and property, not savior and rescued. Partners, Coulter repeated, testing the word. Then he extended his hand. Deal. Lena shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were in this together. Whatever came next. The days passed slowly. Coulter's leg healed, the angry red wound gradually fading to pink scar tissue. He started walking again, first with a crutch, then with a pronounced limp that Dr. Finch assured him would improve with time. Lena continued working with Dr. Finch, learning more about treating injuries and illnesses. The doctor was a good teacher, patient but exacting, and Lena discovered she had a knack for the work. You ever think about doing this full time? Dr. Finch asked one afternoon as they cleaned instruments. Being a doctor? An assistant, at least. You're good with patients, steady hands, don't get squeamish. Lena considered it. I don't know. I never really thought about what I wanted to do with my life, just focused on getting through each day. Well, you're getting through just fine now. Might be time to start thinking bigger. It was a strange concept, thinking bigger, planning for a future that extended beyond immediate survival. That night, Lena mentioned the conversation to Coulter. You should do it, he said immediately. What about the ranch? What about it? We can hire help for the heavy work, and having someone who knows medicine nearby would be useful. Lord knows we're always getting hurt out there. You'd be okay with me spending time in town, not being at the ranch every day? Coulter looked at her like she'd said something absurd. Lena, you're not my property. You can do whatever you want. I know that, but if we're partners, then we talk about big decisions together, and we support each other's choices. He reached for her hand. If you want to learn medicine, learn medicine. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Lena felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not quite love, not yet, anyway, but something close. Something that felt like possibility. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in early September. The courthouse in Clearwater was a simple wooden building with a tin roof and windows that let in too much heat. By the time the proceedings started, the room was packed with spectators, journalists, and people who'd traveled from across the territory to watch Barrett Kane face justice. Barrett sat at the defense table in a clean suit, his shoulder bandaged beneath the fabric. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. His lawyer was a slick man from back east with expensive boots and a smooth voice. He stood when the judge entered and smiled like he'd already won. The prosecution was led by the territorial attorney general, a stern older man named Horace Mitchell who'd made a career out of going after corrupt officials and land barons. Lena and Coulter sat in the front row, watching as the jury was sworn in. 12 men, most of them ranchers or merchants, all looking serious and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution brought witness after witness, people who'd lost their land to Barrett's schemes, families who'd been run off their homesteads, former employees who testified about extortion, bribery, and violence. The evidence from Barrett's office was entered into the record. Payment ledgers showing bribes to the sheriff, contracts for stolen cattle, forged deeds. Barrett's lawyer objected constantly, trying to discredit witnesses, questioning the validity of the documents, arguing that his client was a legitimate businessman being persecuted by jealous competitors. It was exhausting to watch. The legal arguments went over Lena's head half the time, full of technical language and procedural rules she didn't understand, but the human stories were clear enough and devastating. On the third day, Lena was called to testify. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, her palms sweating. The courtroom seemed to close in around her, all those eyes watching, judging. The prosecutor approached with a kind expression. Please state your name for the record. Lena Mercer. Miss Mercer, how did you first encounter the defendant, Barrett Kane? Lena took a breath and told the story. The saloon, Frank selling her to cover his debt, Barrett trying to take possession of her like she was livestock. The courtroom was silent as she spoke. She didn't look at Barrett. Couldn't. If she did, she might lose her nerve. And what happened then? The prosecutor asked. Coulter Hayes paid the debt.
and took the contract instead. Why do you think Mr. Hayes did that? Barrett's lawyer stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. Sustained, the judge said. The prosecutor nodded. Let me rephrase. What did Mr. Hayes do with the contract after he obtained it? He gave it to me, told me I could burn it if I wanted, that I wasn't his property. And did you burn it? No, I kept it as a reminder of where I came from. What happened after you went to live at Iron Mesa Ranch? Lena described the attacks, the fires, the shootings, the constant harassment from Barrett's men. Her voice remained steady, clinical, even as she recounted things that still gave her nightmares. When the prosecutor finished, Barrett's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was aggressive, trying to paint her as a liar, an opportunist, someone who'd manipulated Coulter for her own gain. Isn't it true, Miss Mercer, that you had nowhere else to go? That you attached yourself to Mr. Hayes because you needed his protection? I stayed because he gave me a choice, Lena said evenly. That's more than anyone else had ever done. And in exchange for this supposed generosity, you helped him fabricate evidence against my client? We didn't fabricate anything. Those documents came from Barrett's own office. Documents you allegedly stole during an illegal break-in. We didn't break in. The door was unlocked. The lawyer's expression turned sharp. So you admit you entered my client's private property without permission? Lena met his eyes. Yes. After his men had spent months trying to kill us. The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but the judge cut him off. Move on, counselor. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Lena didn't waver. Every attempt to trip her up, to make her look foolish or vindictive, failed. Finally, the lawyer gave up. No further questions. Lena stepped down from the witness stand and returned to her seat beside Coulter, her legs weak with relief. You did good, Coulter whispered. I almost punched his lawyer. That would have been entertaining. On the fourth day, Coulter testified. He was calm, methodical, walking the jury through everything that had happened. His testimony matched Lena's in every detail, and the prosecutor used it to systematically dismantle Barrett's defense. Barrett's lawyer tried the same aggressive tactics, but Coulter was harder to rattle. He'd been through worse things than a courtroom cross-examination. When both sides had finished presenting their cases, the judge instructed the jury and sent them to deliberate. The waiting was unbearable. Lena and Coulter sat on a bench outside the courthouse, watching the sun track across the sky. Other witnesses and spectators milled around, smoking, talking in low voices. How long do you think it'll take? Lena asked. Could be hours, could be days. Coulter leaned back against the wall. Juries are unpredictable. What if they acquit him? Then we start over. Find another way to stop him. There might not be another way. There's always another way. Coulter looked at her. We've come this far. I'm not giving up now. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they finally returned to the courtroom, everyone crowded back inside, tense and silent. The foreman stood, a weathered rancher with gray hair and serious eyes. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman looked directly at Barrett. We find the defendant guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others gasped. Barrett's lawyer immediately started shouting objections, demanding a mistrial, while Barrett himself sat frozen, his face pale. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. When the room finally quieted, he turned to Barrett. Barrett Kane, you have been found guilty of bribery, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder, theft, and fraud. This court sentences you to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison. You will also forfeit all property and assets obtained through illegal means to be redistributed to your victims as restitution. Barrett finally moved, standing so fast his chair fell backward. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll appeal. You have the right to appeal, the judge said coldly. But until that appeal is heard, you will be remanded to custody. Take him away. The deputies moved in, grabbing Barrett's arms. He struggled, shouting threats and curses, but they dragged him out of the courtroom and into a waiting wagon. Lena watched him go, feeling nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying fear for too long. Coulter put his arm around her shoulders. It's over. Is it? The worst of it, yeah. Outside, people were celebrating. Someone had brought whiskey, and it was being passed around freely.
Thomas found them in the crowd and pulled them both into a crushing hug. "We did it," he crowed. "We actually did it." "Couldn't have done it without you," Coulter said. "Damn right you couldn't." Thomas grinned. "So what's next? You two heading back to Iron Mesa?" Coulter glanced at Lena. "I think so. Time to start rebuilding. You'll have help. Half the territory owes you a debt after this, myself included." They stayed in Clearwater for another week, tying up loose ends. The judge confirmed that Iron Mesa Ranch was legally theirs, free and clear. Barrett's claim on the water rights was nullified. Several of Barrett's former holdings were being auctioned off to pay restitution. Coulter bid on some cattle and equipment, buying back things that had been stolen from Iron Mesa over the years. Lena visited Dr. Finch one last time before they left. "You sure about going back?" the doctor asked. "I could use a good assistant here." "I'm sure, but I'd like to keep learning, if you'll teach me." "Come back when you can. I'll show you what I know." They shook hands, and Lena felt another door opening. Another choice made. The ride back to Iron Mesa took 2 days. When they finally crested the ridge and looked down at the valley, Lena's breath caught. The ranch looked worse than she remembered. The house was a blackened skeleton. The barn was gone. Fences lay in pieces across the scorched earth, but the land was still there, and the water still flowed from the spring beneath Iron Mesa's red cliffs. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," Coulter said quietly. "Yeah," Lena agreed. "We do." They rode down into the valley as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the broken ground. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And for the first time in her life, Lena understood what that meant. Not ownership, not control. Home. The first thing they rebuilt was the well house. Not the barn, not the living quarters, but the stone structure that protected the spring. Because without water, nothing else mattered. Coulter worked despite his legs still giving him trouble, hauling rocks and mixing mortar, while Lena cleared debris and salvaged what materials they could from the wreckage. It took them 3 weeks of backbreaking labor, and when they finally set the last stone in place, they both stood there covered in dust and sweat, staring at what they'd built. "It's not pretty," Coulter said. "No," Lena agreed, "but it'll hold." That became their philosophy for everything that followed. It didn't have to be pretty, it just had to hold. Thomas arrived a week later with 6 men and 2 wagons full of lumber. "Figured you could use some help," he said, climbing down from his horse with a grunt. "We can't pay you," Coulter said. "Didn't ask you to. Consider it payment for what you did. Barrett had his fingers in a lot of pies around here. With him gone, folks are sleeping easier." The men set to work immediately, and suddenly the impossible task of rebuilding became merely difficult. They framed a new house, smaller than the original but solid, built a barn that could shelter horses and store equipment, repaired fences and corrals. Lena worked alongside them, learning carpentry the same way she'd learned everything else at Iron Mesa, by doing it until her hands knew the motions without thinking. She got good at driving nails, at measuring cuts, at reading Coulter's sketches and turning them into reality. Other people came too. Families from Cooper's Ridge, ranchers who'd suffered under Barrett's schemes, even a few people from Dust Hollow, looking embarrassed but sincere in their offers to help. One of them was a middle-aged woman named Sarah Brennan, who'd lost her husband to one of Barrett's hired guns 3 years earlier. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah told Lena one afternoon as they worked together painting the new barn, "for standing up to him, for not backing down." "I didn't do it alone," Lena said. "No? But you did it?" Sarah dipped her brush in the paint. "That matters. Especially for women like us who've spent our whole lives being told we don't get a say in how things go." Lena thought about that conversation for days afterward, about how many people had been living in fear, waiting for someone else to stand up first. By late October, the ranch was functional again. Not finished, there were still a dozen projects that needed doing, but livable. The house had walls and a roof. The barn sheltered livestock. Water flowed through repaired irrigation channels. Coulter stood in the yard one evening, looking at everything they'd accomplished, and Lena saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Peace, or at least the beginning of it. "You okay?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different things could have gone. If I'd walked past you in that saloon, if you'd decided to run instead of stay." "But I didn't." "I know." Coulter looked at her. "I'm glad you didn't." Lena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Over the past months, something had shifted between them. The careful partnership had deepened into something harder to name. They moved around each other with an awareness that went beyond friendship, touches lingering a fraction too long, conversations trailing into comfortable silence. But neither of them had said anything about it. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real, and real things could be lost. "Coulter," Lena started, then stopped, not sure how to continue. He waited, patient as always. "I've been thinking too," she finally said, "about what comes next." "Yeah?" "Dr. Finch wrote to me, said she's opening a clinic in Clearwater and wants me to apprentice with her, 2 days a week to start." Coulter's expression didn't change. "What did you tell her?" "That I needed to talk to you first." "Why?" "I already said you should do it if you want. Because this place needs work, and I don't want you thinking I'm abandoning—" "Lena," Coulter caught her hand. "I don't think that. I won't ever think that. You staying here isn't about obligation. It's about choice. And if you choose to learn medicine, that's good. The Valley needs a doctor who isn't 3 days ride away." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, I've been thinking about taking on a hired hand or two. Ranch is getting too big for one person to manage alone." "It was always too big for one person." "Yeah, well, I'm a slow learner." Lena laughed and something loosened in her chest. She wrote back to Dr. Finch that night, accepting the apprenticeship. The first snows came in November, dusting Iron Mesa's red cliffs with white. The valley transformed into something stark and beautiful, and the ranch settled into the rhythm of winter work. Feeding animals, checking fences, keeping ice broken in the water troughs. Lena started riding to Clearwater twice a week, spending long days with Dr. Finch learning about anatomy, medicine, and the art of keeping people alive when their bodies were trying to give up. She learned to set broken bones, stitch wounds, recognize the signs of infection and fever. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking, but it felt right in a way nothing else had, like she'd found a purpose that fit. Coulter hired 2 men from Cooper's Ridge, brothers named Jack and Samuel, who'd lost their own place to drought. They were hard workers, quiet and competent, and they treated Lena with the same respect they showed Coulter, which was new, and strange, and good. One evening in December, Thomas arrived with news. "Barrett escaped," he said without preamble. Lena's blood went cold. "What?" "3 days ago. Killed a guard and 2 other prisoners getting out. Nobody knows where he went." Coulter's jaw tightened. "He'll come here." "That's what I figured. Brought some men with me. We'll keep watch until he's caught." They fortified the ranch again, setting up watches, checking weapons, sleeping in shifts. The fear that Lena thought she'd left behind came roaring back, settling in her stomach like a stone. But the days passed, and Barrett didn't come. A week went by. Then 2. Thomas's men started to relax, joking that maybe Barrett had fled the territory entirely. Lena didn't believe it. Barrett wasn't the type to run. He was the type to come back for revenge. She was proven right 3 weeks after the escape. Lena was returning from Clearwater, riding through the winter twilight, when she saw smoke rising from Iron Mesa. Not the lazy smoke of a cooking fire, the thick black smoke of something burning. She spurred her horse into a gallop, her heart hammering. When she reached the ranch, she found the new barn engulfed in flames. Jack and Samuel were hauling water, trying to contain it, while Coulter limped around, frantically counting heads. "Where's Thomas?" Coulter shouted when he saw her. "I don't know. I just got here. He went to check the north fence an hour ago and never came back." Lena's stomach dropped. She wheeled her horse around and rode toward the north fence line, the revolver heavy at her hip. She found Thomas on the ground near the creek, bleeding from a head wound. He was conscious but dazed. "What happened?" Lena asked, dropping down beside him. "Barrett," Thomas gasped. "He was waiting, hit me from behind." "Where did he go?" Thomas pointed toward the house. "Said he was going to finish what he started." Lena helped Thomas onto her horse, then ran toward the house on foot. She burst through the door to find Barrett standing in the main room with a pistol pointed at Coulter. Coulter stood near the fireplace, weaponless, his hands raised. "Took you long enough to get here," Barrett said without looking at Lena. His face was gaunt, dirty, his expensive clothes replaced with prison rags, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating. "Let him go," Lena said, her hand moving toward her revolver. "Pull that gun and I shoot him,"
Barrett said calmly. Your choice. Lena froze. That's better. Barrett smiled. You know, I spent 3 weeks in that prison thinking about what I'd do when I got out. Thought about killing you both, burning this place to ash, making you watch everything you built turn to nothing. So why haven't you? Coulter asked quietly. Because I realized something. Killing you would be mercy. You dying quick, not having to live with what you did to me. Barrett's finger tightened on the trigger. But making you watch her die first? Making you live with that? That's so much better. He turned the gun toward Lena. Time slowed. Lena saw Coulter move, saw him lunge even though he was too far away, saw the gun swing back toward him. And she made a choice. She drew her revolver and fired. The shot took Barrett in the chest. He staggered backward, surprise flashing across his face, then collapsed. Coulter caught himself against the wall, breathing hard. You hit? No. You? No. They both stared at Barrett's body. Blood spread across the floorboards, dark and final. Lena's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the gun. Coulter took it from her gently, setting it aside, then pulled her into his arms. It's okay, he murmured. It's over. It's really over. Lena buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself fall apart. They buried Barrett in an unmarked grave far from the ranch. No ceremony, no words, just dirt and silence and the knowledge that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. The territorial marshal came a week later to investigate. He listened to their story, examined the evidence, and ruled it self-defense. Barrett Kane made a lot of enemies, the marshal said as he prepared to leave. Can't say I'm surprised it ended this way. Or sorry. After he left, Lena stood on the porch watching the winter sun sink behind Iron Mesa. Coulter came out and stood beside her. You all right? I don't know. I killed him. You defended yourself, defended us. I know, but that doesn't make it easier. Coulter was quiet for a moment. No, it doesn't. Taking a life never gets easier, even when it's necessary. Does the guilt go away? Eventually, mostly, you learn to live with it. He looked at her. But you don't have to carry it alone. Lena leaned against him, and they stood together as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. Spring came slowly to Iron Mesa, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown grass and muddy ground. But as the weeks passed, green began pushing through the dead growth. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors. The creek swelled with runoff. And then in late April, it rained. Not a drizzle or a passing shower, but a real storm that lasted 3 days and soaked the parched earth until water pooled in every depression and ran in rivers through the irrigation channels. Lena stood in the rain with her face turned up to the sky, laughing as water streamed down her face and plastered her hair to her skull. Coulter joined her, grinning like a kid. We're going to flood if this keeps up. I don't care. They danced in the muddy yard while Jack and Samuel whooped from the barn doorway. When the rain finally stopped, the valley had transformed. Everything was green and alive and growing. The cattle fattened on rich grass. The crops they'd planted started sprouting. The ranch, which had felt like a battlefield for so long, began to feel like a home. People started coming to Iron Mesa for water. Not to steal it or fight over it, but to ask politely if they could fill their barrels and water their livestock. Coulter and Lena worked out a system. Anyone could use the water, free of charge, as long as they respected the property and didn't waste it. Word spread. Iron Mesa became known as a place where people helped each other instead of competing, where fairness mattered more than profit. Families passing through would stop to rest. Travelers would ask for directions and stay for a meal. The ranch became a hub, a gathering place, something bigger than just land and water. Lena's medical practice grew too. People started coming to her with injuries and illnesses, trusting her to help even though she wasn't a proper doctor yet. She set bones, delivered babies, treated fevers and infections. Dr. Finch visited one summer afternoon and found Lena stitching up a rancher who'd been kicked by his horse. Not bad, the doctor said, examining Lena's work. Your sutures are getting cleaner. Thanks to you, Dr. Finch smiled. You're a natural. Another year or two of training, and you'll be ready to practice on your own. Really? Really, this valley's lucky to have you. After the rancher left, Lena sat on the porch with Dr. Finch, drinking coffee and watching the sun paint Iron Mesa in shades of gold. You're happy here? Dr. Finch observed. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Lena said. I am. That's good. Happiness is harder to find than most people think. I didn't find it. I built it. Dr. Finch raised her cup in a small toast. Even better. One evening in late summer, Coulter asked Lena to ride up to the mesa with him. They climbed the narrow trail to the top and sat on the red rocks overlooking the valley. The ranch spread out below them, the new buildings golden in the sunset, smoke rising from the chimney, horses grazing in the pasture. Remember when we first came back here after the trial? Coulter asked. And it was all burned and broken? Of course. I didn't think we could fix it. Thought maybe we should just sell the land and start over somewhere else. Why didn't you? Because you said it was home. Coulter looked at her. And you were right. Lena felt her throat tighten. Coulter, let me finish. He took her hand. I spent 3 years after my wife died just surviving, going through the motions, not really living. Then you showed up and everything changed. You made me remember that life's worth fighting for, that building something matters more than hiding from loss. You did the same for me. I know, that's why... He stopped, took a breath. That's why I want to do this right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. Lena's heart stopped. I'm not good with words, Coulter said, and I'm probably doing this all wrong, but I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because you owe me anything or because it's expected, but because I love you and I want to build the rest of my life with you. Lena stared at the ring, at Coulter's scarred hands, at the hope and fear in his eyes. A year ago, she would have said yes out of gratitude or obligation or fear of being alone, but that wasn't why she said yes now. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. I'll marry you. Coulter's face broke into a smile so bright it hurt to look at. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. They kissed on top of Iron Mesa as the sun set and the valley filled with shadows and golden light. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in the yard with Thomas officiating and half the valley in attendance. Lena wore a dress that Sarah Brennan had helped her sew, simple but beautiful. Coulter wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair. The celebration lasted all day and into the night. People brought food, music, stories. Children ran through the yard chasing each other while adults danced and drank and laughed. Lena stood at the edge of it all for a moment, watching the community they'd built. These people weren't here out of obligation. They were here because they wanted to be, because Iron Mesa had become something that mattered. Coulter appeared at her side, offering his hand. Dance with me? I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. They danced badly, stepping on each other's toes, laughing when they lost the rhythm. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this moment, this feeling, this life they'd fought so hard to claim. As winter approached again, Lena discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She told Coulter one night as they sat by the fire, and he went completely still. You sure? He asked. Dr. Finch confirmed it yesterday. Coulter stared into the flames for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I'm scared. Me too. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't protect... Coulter. Lena took his hand. We can't control everything. We can only do our best and hope it's enough. That doesn't make me less scared. I know, but we'll be scared together. He pulled her close, and they sat in silence while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Their daughter was born in May, a squalling, red-faced thing with Coulter's dark hair and Lena's stubborn chin. They named her Annie, after Coulter's mother. Lena had never been so exhausted or so happy in her life. She held Annie in her arms and felt something fundamental shift inside her. This tiny person was hers to protect, to raise, to love. And she would make sure Annie never knew what it felt like to be traded like property. Never knew what it felt like to believe she had no value beyond what someone else decided. Annie would grow up knowing she had choices, that she was strong, that the world might be hard, but she was harder. The years passed. Iron Mesa prospered. The ranch grew, expanding operations, hiring more workers, becoming one of the largest and most successful in the territory. But Coulter and Lena never forgot where they'd started. They kept their doors open, their water free, their help available to anyone who needed it. Lena finished her medical training and became the valley's primary doctor, working from a clinic they built near the ranch. She delivered babies, treated injuries, and saved lives. Her reputation spread, and people traveled from miles away to see her. Annie grew into a fierce, bright child who climbed trees and rode horses and asked questions about everything. Coulter taught her how to work the land. Lena taught her how to think for herself. When Annie was 5, she asked Lena about the scar on her arm, a faint mark from a bullet that had grazed her during the final battle with Barrett's men. "What happened?" Annie asked, tracing the line with one small finger. Lena thought about how to answer, about whether to tell her daughter the truth or soften it into something more palatable. In the end, she chose truth. "I got hurt fighting for something I believed in," Lena said, "fighting to protect people I loved." "Did it hurt?" "Yes." "Was it worth it?" Lena looked at her daughter, at the ranch beyond the window, at the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness and hope. "Yes," she said, "it was worth it." On a warm evening in late summer, when Annie was 7, Lena stood on the porch watching the sunset paint Iron Mesa in impossible colors. Coulter came out and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life could have been. If you'd walked past me in that saloon, if I'd stayed scared, if I'd never learned that I could fight back. You always had that strength. I just gave you a chance to use it." "We gave each other a chance," Lena corrected. "That's what made the difference." They stood together as the light faded and the stars emerged, their daughter's laughter drifting from inside the house. Lena had learned a lot of hard lessons in her life. That survival wasn't the same as living. That running from fear only made it stronger. That the people who tried to break you often ended up broken themselves. But the most important lesson was this: you couldn't wait for someone else to save you. You had to save yourself. And sometimes, when you were brave enough to stand up for what mattered, you discovered you weren't alone after all. The frontier had tried to destroy her. Frank had tried to sell her. Barrett had tried to own her. But she'd fought back. She'd built something beautiful from the ruins of that fight. And she'd proven that the most powerful thing a person could claim wasn't land or water or money. It was the simple, radical act of choosing their own life. Iron Mesa would stand long after she was gone. The water would flow, the land would endure. Future generations would work this soil and build their own lives on the foundation she and Coulter had laid. But right now, in this moment, Lena Mercer Hayes wasn't thinking about the future or dwelling on the past. She was simply standing beside the man she loved in the home they'd built together, grateful for every hard choice that had led her here. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. You said, Part 5, lưu ý, viết 12.000 đến 12.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, pha hồi thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Part 5, lưu ý. Viết 12.000 đến 12.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần, duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phủ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, có quan điểm cá nhân, thông điệp, bài học, góc nhìn con người. Nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng. Có yếu tố con người, căm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document. Chi đần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. Không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Shomore 849 Claude responded, Part 5. Part 5. The first thing they rebuilt was the well house. Not the barn, not the living quarters, but the stone structure that protected the spring. Because without water, nothing else mattered. Coulter worked despite his legs still giving him trouble, hauling rocks and mixing mortar while Lena cleared debris and salvaged what materials they could from the wreckage. It took them 3 weeks of backbreaking labor, And when they finally set the last stone in place, they both stood there covered in dust and sweat, staring at what they'd built. "It's not pretty," Coulter said. "No," Lena agreed, "but it'll hold." That became their philosophy for everything that followed. It didn't have to be pretty. It just had to hold. Thomas arrived a week later with 6 men and 2 wagons full of lumber. "Figured you could use some help," he said, climbing down from his horse with a grunt. "We can't pay you," Coulter said. "Didn't ask you to. Consider it payment for what you did. Barrett had his fingers in a lot of pies around here. With him gone, folks are sleeping easier." The men set to work immediately, and suddenly the impossible task of rebuilding became merely difficult. They framed a new house, smaller than the original but solid, built a barn that could shelter horses and store equipment, repaired fences and corrals. Lena worked alongside them, learning carpentry the same way she'd learned everything else at Iron Mesa, by doing it until her hands knew the motions without thinking. She got good at driving nails, at measuring cuts, at reading Coulter's sketches, and turning them into reality. The work was grueling. Her shoulders ached every night, blisters formed and burst and formed again. But there was something satisfying about swinging a hammer, about watching walls rise from foundation posts, about creating something tangible from plans and determination. Other people came too. Families from Cooper's Ridge, ranchers who'd suffered under Barrett's schemes, even a few people from Dust Hollow, looking embarrassed but sincere in their offers to help. One of them was a middle-aged woman named Sarah Brennan, who'd lost her husband to one of Barrett's hired guns 3 years earlier. "I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah told Lena one afternoon as they worked together painting the new barn, "for standing up to him, for not backing down." "I didn't do it alone," Lena said. "No, but you did it." Sarah dipped her brush in the paint. "That matters, especially for women like us who've spent our whole lives being told we don't get a say in how things go." Lena paused mid-stroke. "You think things are changing? Really changing?" Sarah considered the question. "Maybe. Maybe not everywhere. But here? Yeah. People saw what you did, saw that you didn't need permission to fight back. That's going to stick with them. Or they'll forget as soon as the next strong man comes along." "Some will, but not all." Sarah smiled. "That's how change works, isn't it? Not all at once. Just a few people at a time deciding they're done accepting how things are." Lena thought about that conversation for days afterward, about how many people had been living in fear waiting for someone else to stand up first, about how Barrett's power had rested not just on violence, but on everyone believing he was unstoppable. She'd learned something crucial in the fight against him. Fear was a choice, so was courage. And once you made that choice, once you took that first step, everything else became possible. By late October, the ranch was functional again. Not finished. There were still a dozen projects that needed doing, but livable. The house had walls and a roof. The barn sheltered livestock. Water flowed through repaired irrigation channels. Coulter stood in the yard one evening looking at everything they'd accomplished, and Lena saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Peace. Or at least the beginning of it. "You okay?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how different things could have gone. If I'd walked past you in that saloon. If you'd decided to run instead of stay." He turned to look at her. "If I'd let fear win instead of doing what was right." "You've always done what was right." "No, I spent 3 years hiding, letting Barrett and men like him run roughshod over people who couldn't fight back. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I'd paid enough already." "Coulter, I'm not looking for absolution," he said quietly, just acknowledging the truth. "I was a coward for a long time. You reminded me what it meant not to be." Lena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Over the past months, something had shifted between them. The careful partnership had deepened into something harder to name. They moved around each other with an awareness that went beyond friendship, touches lingering a fraction too long, conversations trailing into comfortable silence. But neither of them had said anything about it. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real, and real things could be lost. "Coulter," Lena started, then stopped, not sure how to continue. He waited, patient as always. "I've been thinking too," she finally said, "about what comes next." "Yeah?" "Dr. Finch wrote to me, said she's opening a clinic in Clearwater and wants me to apprentice with her. 2 days a week to start." Coulter's expression didn't change. "What did you tell her?"
that I needed to talk to you first. Why? I already said you should do it if you want.
Because this place needs work, and I don't want you thinking I'm abandoning. Lena, Coulter caught her hand. I don't think that. I won't ever think that. You staying here isn't about obligation. It's about choice. And if you choose to learn medicine, that's good. The valley needs a doctor who isn't 3 days' ride away. You're sure? I'm sure. He squeezed her hand. Besides, I've been thinking about taking on a hired hand or two. Ranch is getting too big for one person to manage alone. It was always too big for one person. Yeah, well, I'm a slow learner. Lena laughed and something loosened in her chest. She wrote back to Dr. Finch that night, accepting the apprenticeship. The first snows came in November, dusting Iron Mesa's red cliffs with white. The valley transformed into something stark and beautiful, and the ranch settled into the rhythm of winter work. Feeding animals, checking fences, keeping ice broken in the water troughs. Lena started riding to Clearwater twice a week, spending long days with Dr. Finch learning about anatomy, medicine, and the art of keeping people alive when their bodies were trying to give up. She learned to set broken bones, stitch wounds, recognize the signs of infection and fever. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking. She watched a child die from pneumonia despite everything Dr. Finch tried. Saw a rancher lose his arm to gangrene because he'd waited too long to seek help. Learned that medicine wasn't about miracles, but about incremental battles fought with knowledge and determination. But it felt right in a way nothing else had, like she'd found a purpose that fit. Coulter hired 2 men from Cooper's Ridge, brothers named Jack and Samuel who'd lost their own place to drought. They were hard workers, quiet and competent, and they treated Lena with the same respect they showed Coulter, which was new and strange and good. One evening in December, Thomas arrived with news that made Lena's blood run cold. Barrett escaped, he said without preamble. Lena set down the plate she'd been washing. What? 3 days ago, killed a guard and 2 other prisoners getting out. Nobody knows where he went. Coulter's jaw tightened. He'll come here. That's what I figured. Brought some men with me. We'll keep watch until he's caught. They fortified the ranch again, setting up watches, checking weapons, sleeping in shifts. The fear that Lena thought she'd left behind came roaring back, settling in her stomach like a stone. But the days passed, and Barrett didn't come. A week went by. Then 2. Thomas's men started to relax, joking that maybe Barrett had fled the territory entirely. Maybe he'd realized he couldn't win, that coming back would just get him killed. Lena didn't believe it. Barrett wasn't the type to accept defeat. He was the type to nurse his grievances until they consumed him, to come back for revenge even if it meant his own destruction. She was proven right 3 weeks after the escape. Lena was returning from Clearwater, riding through the winter twilight with her medical bag strapped behind her saddle. She was thinking about the appendectomy Dr. Finch had performed that morning, about the precise movements of the scalpel, about how thin the line was between life and death. Then she saw smoke rising from Iron Mesa, not the lazy smoke of a cooking fire, the thick black smoke of something burning. She spurred her horse into a gallop, her heart hammering, the medical bag bouncing against her back. When she reached the ranch, she found the new barn engulfed in flames. Jack and Samuel were hauling water, trying to contain it, while Coulter limped around frantically counting heads. "Where's Thomas?" Coulter shouted when he saw her. "I don't know. I just got here." "He went to check the north fence an hour ago and never came back." Lena's stomach dropped. She wheeled her horse around and rode toward the north fence line, the revolver heavy at her hip, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She found Thomas on the ground near the creek, bleeding from a head wound. He was conscious but dazed, one hand pressed against his skull. "What happened?" Lena asked, dropping down beside him and opening her medical bag with shaking fingers. "Barrett," Thomas gasped. "He was waiting. Hit me from behind with something." "Where did he go?" Thomas pointed toward the house with his free hand. Said he was going to finish what he started. Said he'd waited long enough. Lena's training kicked in. She cleaned Thomas's wound quickly, checking his pupils for signs of concussion. The cut wasn't deep, but head wounds always bled like hell. She bound it with strips of clean cloth, her hands moving efficiently despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Can you ride?" she asked. "I think so. Get to the barn. Tell Jack and Samuel what's happening, then get yourself to Dr. Finch." "What are you going to do?" Lena helped Thomas to his feet and onto her horse. "What I have to."
She watched him ride toward the barn, then turned and ran toward the house on foot, her medical bag abandoned in the dirt, the revolver now in her hand. She burst through the door to find Barrett standing in the main room with a pistol pointed at Coulter. Coulter stood near the fireplace, weaponless, his hands raised. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, calculating distances, looking for openings. "Took you long enough to get here," Barrett said without looking at Lena. His face was gaunt, dirty, his expensive clothes replaced with prison rags that hung loose on his frame. 3 weeks on the run had stripped away the veneer of civilization, revealing the desperate animal underneath. But his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and full of hate. "Let him go," Lena said, her hand steady on the revolver despite her racing heart. "Pull that gun and I shoot him," Barrett said calmly. "Your choice." Lena froze, the revolver half raised. "That's better." Barrett smiled, showing teeth stained yellow. "You know, I spent 3 weeks in that prison thinking about what I'd do when I got out. Thought about killing you both quick, burning this place to ash, making you watch everything you built turn to nothing." "So why haven't you?" Coulter asked quietly. "Because I realized something during those long nights in my cell. Killing you would be mercy. You dying quick, not having to live with what you did to me, not having to carry that weight." Barrett's finger tightened on the trigger. "But making you watch her die first? Making you live with that failure for however many years you've got left? That's so much better. That's the kind of pain that doesn't fade." He turned the gun toward Lena. Time slowed. Lena saw Coulter move, saw him lunge even though he was too far away to reach Barrett before the shot. Saw the gun swing back toward Coulter, Barrett's reflexes still sharp despite everything. And she made a choice. She drew her revolver and fired. The shot took Barrett in the chest. He staggered backward, surprise flashing across his face, his own gun discharging into the ceiling with a deafening crack. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then back up at Lena. "You," he started, then collapsed. Coulter caught himself against the wall, breathing hard. "You hit?" "No." "You?" "No." They both stared at Barrett's body. Blood spread across the floorboards in a dark pool that reflected the lamplight. His chest rose and fell once, twice, then went still. Lena's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the gun. The room spun around her. She'd killed people before, during the ambush on the road, during the battle at the ranch. But this was different. This was close, personal. She could see his face, see the exact moment life left his eyes. Coulter took the revolver from her gently, setting it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's over. It's really over." Lena buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself fall apart. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, tears soaking through Coulter's shirt, all the fear and violence and exhaustion of the past months pouring out of her in an unstoppable flood. Coulter held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words she couldn't hear over her own crying. He didn't tell her to stop, didn't tell her she was being dramatic or weak, just held her while she broke and began slowly to put herself back together. When she could finally breathe again, when the sobs had subsided to occasional hiccups, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For falling apart. For, Lena, you just killed a man who was about to murder us both. You're allowed to fall apart." "You don't." "Yes, I do. Just not where anyone can see." He touched her face gently. "You're one of the strongest people I know, but strength doesn't mean you don't feel things. It means you feel them and keep going anyway." They buried Barrett in an unmarked grave far from the ranch, in a rocky patch of ground where nothing grew. No ceremony, no words. Just dirt and silence and the knowledge that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Jack and Samuel helped dig the hole, working in grim silence. Nobody suggested marking the grave or saying anything over it. Some deaths didn't deserve to be honored. The territorial marshal came a week later to investigate. He was a weathered man named Garrett with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. He listened to their story, examined the evidence, walked through the house looking at bullet holes and bloodstains. "Barrett Kane made a lot of enemies," the marshal said as he prepared to leave. "Can't say I'm surprised it ended this way. Or sorry, to be honest. A man like that was always going to come to a bad end." "Is that the official finding?" Coulter asked. Official finding is self-defense. Clear case. You've got witnesses, you've got evidence, and you've got Barrett's prison record showing he was violent and dangerous. Marshal Garrett climbed onto his horse. Far as I'm concerned, you did the territory a favor. After he left, Lena stood on the porch watching the winter sun sink behind Iron Mesa. The sky was the color of blood and gold, beautiful and terrible. Coulter came out and stood beside her. You all right? I don't know. I killed him. You defended yourself, defended us. I know, but that doesn't make it easier. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. I keep seeing his face, the way he looked when he realized he was dying. That'll fade eventually. Does the guilt go away? Coulter was quiet for a moment. No, not completely. You learn to live with it. Learn to accept that you did what you had to do, even if it wasn't what you wanted to do. He looked at her. But you don't have to carry it alone. That's what I'm here for. Lena leaned against him, and they stood together as the sky turned purple and the first stars appeared. She thought about Barrett, about the fear he'd wielded like a weapon, about how his need to control and dominate had ultimately destroyed him. There was a lesson in that, though she wasn't sure she was ready to articulate it yet. People who built their power on fear always lost in the end, because fear only worked as long as people believed they had no choice. The moment someone stood up, the moment someone showed that resistance was possible, the whole structure started to crumble. Barrett had made the mistake of thinking his victims were weak. He'd seen their compliance as proof of his superiority, never understanding that compliance born from fear wasn't the same as acceptance. And when Lena had finally refused to comply, when she'd shown others that refusing was possible, Barrett's power had evaporated like morning mist. Winter deepened. The barn fire had damaged but not destroyed the new structure, and they spent weeks repairing it. The work was tedious but necessary, and Lena found comfort in the routine. She continued her apprenticeship with Dr. Finch, though the rides to Clearwater felt different now. Less like escape, more like purposeful travel between two important parts of her life. Spring came slowly to Iron Mesa, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown grass and muddy ground. But as the weeks passed, green began pushing through the dead growth. Wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors. The creek swelled with runoff, and for the first time in years, water was abundant instead of scarce. And then, in late April, it rained. Not a drizzle or a passing shower, but a real storm that lasted 3 days and soaked the parched earth until water pooled in every depression and ran in rivers through the irrigation channels. Lena stood in the rain with her face turned up to the sky, laughing as water streamed down her face and plastered her hair to her skull. She spread her arms wide, spinning in circles, feeling alive in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Coulter joined her, grinning like a kid. We're going to flood if this keeps up. I don't care. They danced in the muddy yard while Jack and Samuel whooped from the barn doorway. The rain soaked through their clothes, turned the ground to soup, washed away months of dust and ash and death. When the rain finally stopped, the valley had transformed. Everything was green and alive and growing. The air smelled clean. Birds returned, filling the morning with song. The cattle fattened on rich grass. The crops they'd planted started sprouting in neat rows. The ranch, which had felt like a battlefield for so long, began to feel like a home. People started coming to Iron Mesa for water, not to steal it or fight over it, but to ask politely if they could fill their barrels and water their livestock. Coulter and Lena worked out a system together, sitting at the new kitchen table and mapping out fair distribution. Anyone can use the water, Coulter said, free of charge, as long as they respect the property and don't waste it. What about during drought years, Lena asked, when there's not enough for everyone? Then we ration, give priority to families with children, people with medical needs, but everyone gets something. Barrett would have charged them, Lena said quietly. We're not Barrett. Word spread quickly. Iron Mesa became known as a place where people helped each other instead of competing, where fairness mattered more than profit, where you could ask for help without fear of owing your life in return. Families passing through would stop to rest. Travelers would ask for directions and stay for a meal. The ranch became a hub, a gathering place, something bigger than just land and water. Lena's medical practice grew too. People started coming to her with injuries and illnesses, trusting her to help even though she wasn't a proper doctor yet. She set bones, delivered babies, treated fevers and infections,
dispensed the knowledge Dr. Finch had taught her with growing confidence. She lost patients, too. A rancher with a burst appendix who'd waited too long to seek help. A child with measles whose fever wouldn't break. A woman who bled out during childbirth despite everything Lena tried. Those deaths haunted her. She'd lie awake replaying every decision, wondering what she could have done differently, torturing herself with what-ifs and maybes. Dr. Finch found her crying after the childbirth death, sitting alone in the clinic with her head in her hands.
"You can't save everyone," the older woman said gently.
"I should have been faster. Should have. You did everything right. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes people die anyway, and it's not your fault." "Then whose fault is it?" "Nobody's. That's what makes it so hard." Dr. Finch sat down beside her. "You can't carry every death. You'll break under that weight. All you can do is learn what you can and try to do better next time." "How do you live with it?" "By remembering the ones you save. By knowing that every person who walks out of here healthy is someone who might have died without you." She touched Lena's shoulder. "The losses hurt. They should hurt. But don't let them blind you to the victories." Lena thought about that often in the months that followed. About balance. About accepting that doing your best didn't always mean succeeding. About finding meaning in the attempt even when the outcome was tragic. One summer afternoon, Dr. Finch visited the ranch and found Lena stitching up a rancher who'd been kicked by his horse. The man's leg was a mess of torn flesh and bruising, but Lena worked calmly, her sutures neat and even. "Not bad," Dr. Finch said, examining Lena's work after the rancher had left. "Your technique's gotten a lot cleaner." "Thanks to you. You're a natural. Another year or two of training, and you'll be ready to practice on your own." "Really? Really? This valley's lucky to have you." Dr. Finch smiled. "You could do this anywhere, you know. Go to a city. Make real money. Have access to better equipment and supplies." Lena looked out at Iron Mesa, at the ranch spread across the valley, at Coulter working in the distance. "No, this is where I'm needed." "That's what I thought you'd say." Dr. Finch stood to leave. "Just know the option's there. If you ever change your mind." But Lena knew she wouldn't. She'd spent 18 years being powerless, being moved around like a piece on someone else's board. Now she'd finally found a place where she could put down roots, where her choices mattered, where she could build something lasting. She wasn't going anywhere. One evening in late summer, Coulter asked Lena to ride up to the mesa with him. They climbed the narrow trail to the top, their horses picking their way carefully over loose rock, and sat looking down at the valley. The ranch spread out below them, the buildings golden in the sunset, smoke rising from the chimney, horses grazing in the pasture. It looked peaceful, permanent, like it had always been there and always would be. "Remember when we first came back here after the trial?" Coulter asked. "And it was all burned and broken?" "Of course. I didn't think we could fix it. Thought maybe we should just sell the land and start over somewhere else where the memories weren't so heavy." "Why didn't you?" "Because you said it was home." Coulter looked at her. "And you were right." Lena felt her throat tighten. "Coulter, let me finish." He took her hand. "I spent 3 years after my wife died just surviving, going through the motions, not really living, just existing from one day to the next. Then you showed up and everything changed. You made me remember that life's worth fighting for, that building something matters more than hiding from loss." "You did the same for me," Lena said. "Showed me I didn't have to accept whatever hand I was dealt, that I could fight back." "I know. That's why—" He stopped, took a breath. "That's why I want to do this right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. Not fancy or expensive, but clearly handmade with care, the metal polished smooth. Lena's heart stopped. "I'm not good with words," Coulter said, "and I'm probably doing this all wrong. But I'm asking if you'll marry me, not because you owe me anything, or because it's expected, or because we need to make things proper in the eyes of the town, but because I love you, and I want to build the rest of my life with you, as equals, as partners." Lena stared at the ring, at Coulter's scarred hands holding it, at the hope and fear in his eyes. A year ago, she might have said yes out of gratitude or obligation or fear of being alone. She might have seen it as another form of ownership, another contract binding her to someone else's will, but she understood now that this was different. Coulter wasn't asking her to belong to him. He was asking her to choose to build a life together, to stand beside him, not behind him, and that made all the difference. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I'll marry you." Coulter's face broke into a smile so bright it hurt to look at. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, warm against her skin. They kissed on top of Iron Mesa as the sun set and the valley filled with shadows and golden light. And Lena felt something settle deep in her chest, something that felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. They were married in October, a simple ceremony in the yard with Thomas officiating and half the valley in attendance. Lena wore a dress that Sarah Brennan had helped her sew, simple but beautiful, the color of cream. Coulter wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair, though it rebelled within minutes. The celebration lasted all day and into the night. People brought food, more than they could possibly eat. Someone produced a fiddle, and music filled the air. Children ran through the yard chasing each other while adults danced and drank and told stories. Lena stood at the edge of it all for a moment, watching the community they'd built. These people weren't here out of obligation or fear. They were here because they wanted to be. Because Iron Mesa had become a symbol of something important. The idea that you could stand up to power and win, that fairness and cooperation could triumph over greed. Coulter appeared at her side, offering his hand. "Dance with me?" "I don't know how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They danced badly, stepping on each other's toes, laughing when they lost the rhythm. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this moment, this feeling, this life they'd fought so hard to claim. As winter approached again, Lena discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She told Coulter one night as they sat by the fire, both of them exhausted from a day of work, and he went completely still. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Finch confirmed it yesterday." Coulter stared into the flames for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'm scared." "Me too." "What if something goes wrong? What if I can't protect—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I already lost one wife. I don't know if I could survive losing you too." "Coulter." Lena took his hand, squeezing tight. "We can't control everything. We can only do our best and hope it's enough. But we're not doing this alone. We've got Dr. Finch. We've got each other. That's more than most people have." "That doesn't make me less scared." "I know, but we'll be scared together, just like we've done everything else." He pulled her close, and they sat in silence while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, holding on to each other like anchors in a storm. The pregnancy was difficult. Lena was sick constantly in the first months, barely able to keep food down. Then came the exhaustion, bone deep and overwhelming. She continued working as much as she could, but there were days when just getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Coulter hovered, worried and protective, trying to do everything himself so she could rest. It drove her crazy. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she snapped one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a water bucket. "I know, but no buts. I can still work. I need to work. If I spend the next 6 months lying in bed, I'll lose my mind." They compromised. Lena continued her medical practice but reduced her hours. She helped around the ranch but let Jack and Samuel handle the heavy lifting. And she accepted help when she needed it, which was harder than she expected. She'd spent so long learning to be self-sufficient, to never rely on anyone, that accepting assistance felt like weakness. But gradually she understood that it wasn't. That letting people help was its own form of strength, a recognition that nobody could do everything alone. Their daughter was born in May, a squalling, red-faced thing with Coulter's dark hair and Lena's stubborn chin. The labor lasted 18 hours and was the hardest physical ordeal Lena had ever endured, worse than any gunfight or barn raising. Dr. Finch coached her through it while Coulter paced outside, forbidden from entering until it was over. When the baby finally emerged, slippery and screaming, Lena felt something fundamental shift inside her. This tiny person was hers to protect, to raise, to love. And she would make absolutely certain that her daughter never knew what it felt like to be treated like property, never knew what it felt like to believe she had no value beyond what someone else decided. They named her Annie, after Coulter's mother who died when he was young. Annie Hayes. It sounded strong, permanent. Lena had never been so exhausted or so happy in her life. She held Annie in her arms and felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like a blanket. This child depended on her completely, for food, for warmth, for safety, for everything. It should have been terrifying, and it was. But it was also the most purposeful thing she'd ever done. The years passed like water flowing through irrigation channels, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. Iron Mesa prospered. The ranch grew, expanding operations, hiring more workers, becoming one of the largest and most successful in the territory. But Coulter and Lena never forgot where they'd started. They kept their doors open, their water free, their help available to anyone who needed it. It wasn't always easy. Some people took advantage, some saw generosity as weakness, but most understood and appreciated what Iron Mesa represented, a place where cooperation mattered more than competition, where people looked out for each other instead of stepping on each other's throats to get ahead. Lena finished her medical training and became the valley's primary doctor, working from a clinic they built near the ranch. The building was small but well-equipped, funded partly by their own money and partly by donations from people she'd treated over the years. She delivered babies, treated injuries, fought epidemics of influenza and scarlet fever. Her reputation spread, and people traveled from miles away to see her. Some could pay, most couldn't. She treated them all the same. The losses still hurt. She still lay awake some nights replaying difficult cases, wondering what she could have done differently. But she'd learned to balance the grief with the victories, to let herself feel both without being consumed by either. Annie grew into a fierce, bright child who climbed trees and rode horses and asked questions about everything. She had Coulter's quietness and Lena's determination, a combination that made her both thoughtful and unstoppable. Coulter taught her how to work the land, how to read the weather, how to gentle a skittish horse. Lena taught her letters and numbers, taught her about medicine and healing, taught her that the world might try to tell her what she was worth, but she didn't have to listen. When Annie was 5, she asked Lena about the scar on her arm, a faint mark from a bullet that had grazed her during the final battle with Barrett's men. "What happened?" Annie asked, tracing the line with one small finger. Lena thought about how to answer, about whether to tell her daughter the truth or soften it into something more palatable, to protect her from the harsh realities of the world a little while longer. In the end, she chose truth. Because lies, even kind ones, had a way of poisoning things. "I got hurt fighting for something I believed in," Lena said. "Fighting to protect people I loved. Did it hurt? Yes. Was it worth it?" Lena looked at her daughter, at the ranch beyond the window, at the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness and hope. "Yes," she said, "it was worth it." "Would you do it again?" In a heartbeat, Annie considered this seriously. "When I'm grown up, I'm going to be brave like you." "You're already brave," Lena said. "You just don't know it yet." More children followed. A son named Thomas, who was quiet and thoughtful. Twin girls who were anything but quiet. The house filled with noise and chaos and love. And Lena discovered that family could be something you built instead of something you were born into. The valley changed too. New settlements sprang up. Roads improved. The railroad was talking about running a line through the territory, bringing commerce and connection to places that had been isolated for generations. Some people worried that progress would ruin the frontier character of the land. Lena didn't. She'd seen what that frontier character really meant: violence, lawlessness, powerful men crushing anyone who stood in their way. If progress meant accountability and structure and the rule of law actually meaning something, she welcomed it. Barrett Kane became a cautionary tale parents told their children. The man who thought he could own everything and everyone, who learned too late that power built on fear was no power at all. His name became synonymous with greed and cruelty, a reminder of what happened when ambition consumed everything else. The sheriff who'd been on Barrett's payroll left town shortly after the trial. Last anyone heard, he was working as a clerk in some mining camp, powerless and forgotten. Frank Mercer drank himself to death 3 years after selling Lena. Nobody mourned him. Lena learned about it from a traveler and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a distant acknowledgement that some people made their own hells and then complained about the heat. She never saw him again after that night in the saloon. Never wanted to. Whatever debt she might have owed to the man who'd raised her had been paid in full the moment he traded her for gambling debts. On a warm evening in late summer, when Annie was 7 and the younger children were finally asleep, Lena stood on the porch watching the sunset paint Iron Mesa in impossible colors. The sky was orange and pink and purple,
beautiful in a way that still took her breath away even after years of seeing it. Coulter came out and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life could have been if you'd walked past me in that saloon, if I'd stayed scared, if I'd never learned that I could fight back. You always had that strength. I just gave you a chance to use it." "We gave each other a chance," Lena corrected. "That's what made the difference. You couldn't have rebuilt this place alone. And I couldn't have escaped Barrett without you. We needed each other." "Still do," Coulter said quietly. "Yeah, we do."
They stood together as the light faded and the stars emerged, their children's laughter drifting from inside the house, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night, creating a familiar symphony around them. Lena had learned a lot of hard lessons in her life. That survival wasn't the same as living, that running from fear only made it stronger, that the people who tried to break you often ended up broken themselves. But the most important lesson was this: you couldn't wait for someone else to save you. You had to save yourself. And sometimes when you were brave enough to stand up for what mattered, you discovered you weren't alone after all. The frontier had tried to destroy her. Frank had tried to sell her. Barrett had tried to own her. But she'd fought back. She'd built something beautiful from the ruins of that fight, and she'd proven that the most powerful thing a person could claim wasn't land or water or money. It was the simple, radical act of choosing their own life. She thought about all the women who'd come before her, who'd endured and survived but never fought back because they didn't believe they could. About all the women who'd come after, who'd see what she'd done and understand that resistance was possible. Change didn't happen all at once. It happened one person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of defiance at a time. She'd been that defiance for this valley. Someone else would be it somewhere else. And slowly, inch by inch, the world would shift. Iron Mesa would stand long after she was gone. The water would flow. The land would endure. Future generations would work this soil and build their own lives on the foundation she and Coulter had laid. But right now, in this moment, Lena Mercer Hayes wasn't thinking about the future or dwelling on the past. She was simply standing beside the man she loved, in the home they'd built together, grateful for every hard choice that had led her here. Annie appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, I can't sleep." Lena turned and scooped her daughter up, settling her on one hip. "Want to sit out here with us for a bit?" Annie nodded, already drowsing against Lena's shoulder. The three of them stood on the porch together, Coulter, Lena, and Annie, watching the stars emerge one by one against the darkening sky. The valley spread out before them, peaceful and alive, full of possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer by, one of the horses whinnied softly. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the smell of sage and dust and growing things. This was home, not because it was perfect or easy or safe, but because they'd chosen it, fought for it, built it with their own hands, and defended it with everything they had. And that choice, that fight, that building, that was worth more than all the land and water and money in the territory. Lena had started her life as property, something to be traded and owned and used. She'd ended it as a force, a builder, a healer, a wife and mother and partner. Someone who'd looked at the world that tried to crush her and said no, not today, not ever again. And standing there on her porch, her daughter sleeping against her shoulder, her husband's arm around her waist, looking out at everything they'd created together, Lena understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't the absence of struggle. It was the presence of choice. And she had chosen well.